When Richard Lawson returned home early to his Malibu mansion, he expected a quiet afternoon with his wife and his elderly mother. Instead, he walked into a scene that shattered everything he believed about his marriage. His wife, Emily, was cruelly forcing his fragile mother to clean like a servant. In that moment, Richard realized the woman he loved had been hiding a darkness far deeper than he ever imagined. And what he uncovered next would destroy their marriage forever. Richard Lawson had spent the last decade building an empire in the California real estate market, the kind of empire that demanded red-eye flights, endless negotiations, and a constant juggling of deals worth millions. Yet on that particular Friday afternoon, as his jet touched down hours earlier than scheduled at LAX, his mind wasn't on contracts or investors. It was on home on Malibu, on the glimmering coastline that framed his glass-walled mansion, and most of all, on the two women waiting inside it. His wife Emily would surely be surprised. She loved surprises, or at least she used to, and his mother, Margaret, would be thrilled. She always lit up when he came home, even if age had slowed her steps and arthritis had stiffened her fingers. As his black SUV rolled up the steep hill toward the gated driveway, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in months: anticipation. The good kind. The kind that came from picturing a warm welcome. Maybe a homemade meal. Emily always claimed she baked better when she was happy, and perhaps a quiet evening catching up with Margaret, who often complained jokingly that he traveled more than the president. He had cut his trip short precisely for these moments, the small but precious reminders that no matter how high he climbed in business, family was the point of everything. He parked, grabbed his suitcase, and stepped toward the front door with the familiar confidence of a man returning to his sanctuary. But the moment he crossed the threshold, that confidence faltered. Something felt off, like walking into a room that had recently held a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. The housekeeper usually greeted him by now, but the foyer was empty. No footsteps, no muffled veem, no faint hum of music which Emily always had playing somewhere. He didn't dwell on it. Maybe they were both napping or sitting out on the terrace. He loosened his tie, planning to drop his luggage and call out for them. That was when a harsh voice sliced through the house, not loud, but sharp enough to make Richard freeze mid-step. Emily's voice. Except it didn't sound like Emily. Not the version he knew. The one with a soft sweetness that had charmed him the night they met at a charity gala in Santa Monica. This voice carried an edge, a tone that made something cold creep up his spine. He followed the sound toward the living room, each step tightening his chest. As he rounded the corner, an image came into view that knocked the breath out of him more forcefully than any blow could. His wife, standing over his frail mother, ordering her to scrub the floor. Margaret, his elegant, gentle 78-year-old mother, was bent forward, clutching a broom like it weighed 50 pounds. She wore a faded dress that didn't belong to her, something that looked more like an old uniform than clothing. Her shoulders trembled with effort, and Emily stood above her, arms crossed, expression twisted into something unrecognizable. At first, Richard's brain refused to process it. The mind sometimes shields itself from what it isn't prepared to accept. He blinked slowly, expecting the picture to rearrange itself into something logical. But it didn't. Emily barked another order, tapping her foot like a drill sergeant disappointed with a recruit. Margaret flinched. Richard had seen his mother face down financial ruin, widowhood, and crippling arthritis without losing her composure. But now she cowered before a woman half her age. His wife. An instinctive protectiveness surged through him, raw, powerful, and immediate. But layered beneath it was something else, a disbelief. How long had this been happening? How could he not have known? He took a step forward, and the sound of his shoe against the marble finally alerted them. Emily spun around so quickly her hair whipped over her shoulder. Her face drained of color when she saw him, then rearranged itself into a smile that wobbled at the edges. She rushed toward him as if nothing were wrong, talking fast, excuses spilling out before he could speak. But her voice faded into the background. Richard's attention locked onto his mother. Margaret slowly raised her head, her eyes reflecting shock, then relief so overwhelming it looked painful. The broom slipped from her weak hands. The way she looked at him like a drowning person spotting land told Richard everything he needed to know long before she said a word. Emily's behavior wasn't a moment of frustration or misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a routine, a secret life inside his own home. The weight of that realization hit him with brutal clarity. And in that instant, the version of his marriage he believed in died. Emily's attempt at a smile collapsed almost instantly when she realized Richard wasn't responding to her rehearsed sweetness. His eyes were not on her at all, they were fixed on Margaret, who looked smaller than he had ever seen her. The woman who raised him with unwavering strength now seemed to fold into herself, as if demanding less space would somehow protect her from whatever consequences Emily might unleash later. The broom lay at her feet like a discarded accusation. Richard's heart twisted, but anger soon rose to the surface, sharp and visceral. In all his years negotiating with cutthroat developers and ruthless investors, he had never felt fury like the one building inside him, now slow, cold, and dangerous. He stepped toward his mother, and Emily instinctively moved to block him, plastering on a concerned expression. "Honey, don't misunderstand." She wanted to help. She insisted. "You know how she is. She hates sitting around doing nothing." Her voice wavered as she tried to sound casual, but the pitch was all wrong. Richard could hear the tension beneath the surface. The frantic note of someone scrambling to maintain control of a story she already knew she was losing. He didn't even look at her. He brushed past her shoulder, and she stiffened like she'd been physically pushed aside. When he reached Margaret, he crouched down, gently lifting her chin so she would meet his gaze. The moment their eyes connected, something inside him cracked. Margaret's eyes were red, glassy, and full of an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. There was fear in them too, not fear of him, but fear of what truth might cost her. Fear of Emily. The idea alone made Richard's stomach churn. "Mom," he said softly, steadying his voice even as fury surged inside him. "What happened?" "What's going on here?" Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She glanced quickly at Emily, a tiny terrified motion that spoke louder than anything she could say. That one flicker of her eyes was enough to confirm Richard's worst suspicions. Emily wasn't caretaking, she was controlling. She had turned his home, his sanctuary, into a place where his mother had to measure every breath. He rose slowly, turning back toward his wife, who now stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her like she was posing for a portrait she hoped would tell a gentler story than reality ever could. "Explain," Richard demanded, his tone cutting through the room with the precision of a courtroom ruling. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the force behind that single word. Still, she recovered quickly, adopting a defensive posture. "Richard, you're re-blowing this out of proportion. Your mom was bored. She asked to sweep a little. It's not a big deal." She tried to laugh lightly, but the sound died awkwardly in the air between them. Richard stepped closer, and Emily took an instinctive step back. He'd never seen her retreat from him before. Her eyes darted around as if searching for an angle, a way to spin the situation, a script she could lean on. But none came. "My mother can barely hold a coffee mug some mornings," he said, voice dangerously controlled. "And you expect me to believe she volunteered to scrub floors?" Emily lifted her chin. "Maybe if you were home more often you'd understand. I'm the one here dealing with everything. Do you know how difficult she can be? She forgets things, she makes messes, she refuses to follow any routine I set. I'm doing my best, Richard. You think this is easy?" Her words hit him like a slap, not because they were loud, but because they revealed the contempt she had been harboring. It seeped through every syllable. His mother, a woman who spent her entire life sacrificing, scraping by on little, refusing to complain through illness and heartbreak, being reduced to a burden by someone who had promised to treat her like family. Something inside Richard hardened. He turned back to Margaret and noticed the bruising on her knuckles, the rawness of the skin, not fresh injuries, repeated strain. His mother had been working far more than anyone her age ever should, and she hadn't told him she had hidden it. Why? Fear. Embarrassment. Loyalty twisted into something unhealthy. Whatever the reason, he knew who was responsible for that degradation. "Mom," he said softly again, this time firmer, "look at me. Has she been making you do this every day?" Margaret hesitated. She shook her head at first, too quickly, too nervously. Emily moved as if to step forward, and Margaret flinched. That was it. That was the moment everything clicked in Richard's mind. He saw months of manipulation compressed into a single gesture. His jaw tightened. He faced Emily fully now, and this time there was no trace of confusion in his expression, only a cold clarity that made Emily's breath hitch. "Get away from her," he commanded, not shouted, ordered. Emily froze. That tone was new, one she had never heard from him before. It belonged not to the charismatic businessman she had married, but to the man he became in the presence of injustice, a man who closed multi-million-dollar deals by identifying the exact fracture point in an opponent's argument. And she realized too late that she was now the opponent. Emily's voice trembled as she tried again. "Richard, please, you're misunderstanding everything." "No," he cut her off sharply. "I'm finally understanding more than you think." He knelt once more beside Margaret, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. As soon as his hand touched her, she broke quietly, devastatingly. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she reached for him like a child reaching for safety. Richard held her gently, feeling her fragile frame tremble against him. Emily watched, frozen in place, her eyes wide, realizing that whatever power she believed she had was evaporating. Richard stood again, drawing a steady breath, his entire posture transformed into something resolute. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand not aggressively, just decisively, and she stopped. That alone told him everything he needed to know. She listened when she feared consequences, not when she recognized right from wrong. He looked at her with a level of disappointment so deep it bordered on grief. "This ends now," he said. "Whatever this is, whatever you've been doing to her, it's over." Emily swallowed hard, her voice cracking as she attempted another excuse, but Richard didn't give her the chance. The man who once adored her now saw her without the veil of charm she had worn so skillfully. And he understood that the betrayal ran deeper than disloyalty to him. It was cruelty towards someone who could not defend herself. That, to Richard, was unforgivable. In that moment, the foundation of their marriage fractured beyond repair, and Emily knew it. She could see it in Richard's eyes, the shift from love to something colder, stronger, unshakable. A reckoning had begun. As Richard steadied his mother, the truth began to surface in pieces, hesitant, fragile pieces that carried the weight of months of mistreatment. Margaret wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her own tears. A gesture that only drove Richard deeper into a mixture of guilt and rage. His mother had always been the strongest person he knew, the type who refused help even when she needed it. For her to break down like this meant something far darker had been happening behind closed doors than he ever imagined. The realization that all of it happened in his own home, under his own roof, during the days he believed she was safe, ignited something fierce inside him. Emily watched them, shifting her weight nervously, clearly sensing her narrative slipping out from underneath her. She tried again to reclaim control, stepping forward with her hands raised in a gesture of false sincerity. "Richard, let's not make this into something it's not. I'm sure she's confused. She gets overwhelmed. I've been trying to keep everything together while you were gone." She said it with a tone dripping in self-pity, as though she expected praise instead of scrutiny. Richard didn't even move his gaze toward her. He could feel Margaret trembling lightly beneath his hand, and when he looked down again, her eyes carried an apology that tore at him. She seemed to blame herself for what she endured, as if she had failed him by not being stronger, by not speaking up sooner. "Mom," he said gently but firmly, "tell me the truth, all of it. Whatever she's been doing to you, whatever's been happening here, I need to know." Margaret hesitated. Her fingers twisted together in a pattern he recognized from childhood. She used to do that when she was trying to hide something painful. She swallowed hard and lowered her gaze. "Richard, I didn't want to worry you. You were always working so hard, always doing so much. I didn't want to add more stress. Emily, she said you wouldn't believe me, that I'd just cause problems, that maybe I'd get sent somewhere." The tremor in her voice grew stronger. She breathed shakily and her next words came out in fragments. "She took my phone. She said I dropped it, but I didn't. She hid it so I couldn't call you unless she let me." Each sentence hit Richard like another brick to the chest. He felt physically ill. His hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening with the intensity of the emotions warring inside him. Margaret continued, voice growing steadier now that she had crossed the threshold of truth. "She didn't want me resting during the day. She said I was using up electricity, sitting around doing nothing. If she caught me in the living room, she'd tell me to get up, move, clean something. She said you told her you wanted the house spotless and that I needed the exercise." The bitterness that surged inside Richard burned hot. He had never said such a thing. He would never have expected or allowed his mother to lift even a finger in housekeeping when he had full-time staff. Emily had weaponized his absence. She had shaped a twisted narrative where Margaret was an inconvenience, a chore, a thing to manage rather than a human being deserving care and dignity. And if I didn't move fast enough, Margaret paused, squinting as if bracing herself for judgment. She'd raise her voice. Not loud but sharp, like she was talking to a dog. She'd say I was lucky to live here, lucky you married her, lucky she was willing to tolerate me. Emily snapped back instantly, desperation rising in her tone. "That's not true!" "She's mixing things up. She barely remembers anything correctly. Richard, you know she forgets things. She exaggerates." Enough, the single word dropped from Richard's mouth with a force that made Emily's entire posture jolt. He turned toward her slowly, eyes blazing with a fury he no longer attempted to hide. "Do you hear yourself? Look at her." He pointed to his mother, who was clutching her hands together as if trying to keep the pieces of herself from falling apart. "Look at what you've done to her." Emily opened her mouth again, and Richard cut her off before she could utter another excuse. "I trusted you. I brought you into this family. I believed you when you said you wanted her to live with us. that you'd help take care of her. You were so convincing, Emily. I thought you understood what she means to me. Emily's eyebrows knit together as she stepped forward. I did. I still do. But. No, Richard said sharply. Whatever you were about to say doesn't matter. I see the truth now. I see it clearly. He turned back to Margaret and gently lifted her hand. When he saw the cuts along her palm, tiny, shallow, but unmistakably from hours of cleaning, something inside him snapped. Any remaining doubt dissolved. Emily hadn't simply mistreated Margaret. She had exploited her frailty, manipulated her fears, and used Richard's trust as her shield. Margaret whispered softly, I didn't want you to think I was causing trouble. She said you were tired of taking care of me. She said if I didn't cooperate, I'd be sent somewhere far away. Her voice trembled again. And I didn't want to lose you. Richard knelt in front of her, fighting the urge to break down himself. Mom, you could never lose me, and you were never a burden. Not for one moment. What she told you wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. He paused, standing again, his expression turning colder as he addressed Emily. You used my love for her against her. That alone tells me exactly what kind of person you are. Emily's face twisted with anger, for the first time, real anger, unmasked and unfiltered. Oh, so now I'm the villain. You were gone for weeks at a time, and I'm the one stuck here handling everything. She forgets to turn off the stove, she spills things constantly, she leaves lights on all over the house. You have no idea what I deal with while you re off playing businessman. The accusation didn't land the way she intended. It only exposed her resentment more clearly. Richard shook his head, disbelief etched into every line of his face. You don't talk about my mother like that. Not ever. His voice dropped lower, colder, and nothing justifies what you've done. Emily looked like she wanted to argue, but the fight was draining from her. She saw the shift in him, saw the man who no longer viewed her as his partner, but as a threat to the person he loved most in the world. She understood, even if she didn't want to admit it, that the version of Richard she could manipulate was gone. Meanwhile, Margaret's breathing steadied slightly now that the truth was out. She wasn't healed, not even close. But something inside her loosened, the first step toward reclaiming the dignity Emily had been stripping away piece by piece. And Richard, standing between the two women, knew there was no going back. The damage was too deep, the deception too deliberate, the cruelty too intentional. For the first time since stepping through the front door, he finally understood the full truth. His mother hadn't simply been mistreated. She had been living in fear, and the woman he married was the architect of that fear. The reckoning had begun, and Richard would make sure it didn't end until justice was restored. Emily stood rigidly near the coffee table, her jaw clenched and her eyes darting between Richard and Margaret as if she couldn't decide whether to keep pretending or finally show her true face. For months she had dictated the rhythm of the house, structuring every moment around her convenience. And now the control she cherished was slipping with every breath Richard took. She sensed it. The shift in him was unmistakable, and panic flashed across her features before she masked it with indignation. Richard, you don't understand what it's been like, she started, her voice rising with a brittle edge. Your mother makes mistakes constantly. I've had to clean up after her more times than I can count. I've done nothing but help, and now you choosing to believe a version of events that makes no sense. Richard's eyes hardened. He stepped between Emily and his mother, and the movement alone made Emily recoil slightly. You still trying to spin this, he said, disbelief threaded through his tone. Even now, after everything she just told me, after what I saw with my own eyes, you still performing. He gestured toward Margaret, who had pulled her hands into her lap, her posture tense with the memory of being scolded minutes earlier. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I can't recognize cruelty when it's right in front of me? Emily's lips twitched and her tone morphed into one dripping with contempt. Cruelty. She repeated, scoffing. I've been the one sacrificing my time, my peace, my entire life so your mother wouldn't end up hurting herself. You act like she's some helpless saint, but you never here to see how difficult she can be. The bitterness in her voice wasn't subtle now, it poured out, uncontrolled, fueled by resentment she had clearly bottled up for far too long. Richard let out a sharp exhale, staring at her as though she had just confirmed every suspicion that had been growing since he walked into the room. She's 78 years old, he said. She's not a liability, she's my mother, and you treat her like an inconvenience. Emily crossed her arms, her expression twisting further. Everything in this house became about her. What she needed, what she wanted, what she couldn't do. You think it's easy living with someone who needs constant monitoring. You think it's fun being treated like a caretaker instead of a wife. The cracks in her mask widened with each word, revealing the resentment that had been festering beneath the polished exterior of the perfect partner she pretended to be. Richard took a slow step toward her. If being supportive was too much for you, he said quietly but firmly, you tell me. You don't abuse someone who can't defend themselves. You don't manipulate a woman who spent her whole life working until her hands gave out. His voice deepened. You don't use my absence as an opportunity to make her feel like she doesn't belong in her own son's home. Emily's eyes narrowed. She felt her control crumbling and desperation began to seep into her expression. I didn't do anything wrong, she insisted. You're just trying to make me the villain because you feel guilty for not being here. She stepped closer to him, attempting to regain the emotional leverage she once wielded with ease. Richard, you retired from traveling. You re-stressed. You rehearing what you want to hear. Let's just take a breath and talk this through like adults. She reached out to touch his arm. He stepped back before she could lay a hand on him. The rejection startled her. That simple movement said more than any sentence. Could he no longer trusted her enough to let her close? Her confidence cracked visibly, and a flash of anger flickered in her eyes at the realization. You know what, she snapped, this is unbelievable. I've been managing everything while you re-off making deals, and the moment you come home, you take her word over mine. She can't even keep track of her own belongings. She loses things constantly and then accuses me of stealing. Margaret shifted uncomfortably, flinching at the accusation, and Richard's jaw tightened. She didn't lose anything, he said in a low voice. You took her phone, and I'm willing to bet there's much more you've hidden. Emily opened her mouth, but her expression faltered as Richard stepped toward the table and picked up the broom Margaret had been forced to hold. He held it up between them. You made her do this, he said. You forced her to scrub floors in a house with a full staff. And you think I'm going to believe she volunteered? Emily's composure finally snapped. Fine, she exploded. Yes, I asked her to help, because she does nothing all day. She just sits there staring at the walls or watching V. She's draining the life out of this place. Her voice rose with each word. I didn't sign up for this. I married you, not a retirement home. Richard's breathing grew heavier, his face tightening with disgust. You said you wanted her here. You insisted it would be an honor to take care of her. Emily laughed bitterly. That was before I knew what having her here would be like. She slows everything down. She gets in the way. Stop, Richard's voice cut through hers forcefully. Just stop. There was no misunderstanding anymore, no missing puzzle piece, no blind spots. The woman he once believed was compassionate, supportive, loving, she was gone, or more accurately, she never existed. The person standing in front of him was someone who measured human worth by convenience. Someone who saw his mother as weight to be dragged rather than a member of the family to be cherished. Richard turned back to Margaret and helped her onto the sofa more comfortably. His heart ached at how she shrank back as if bracing for another reprimand, even though Emily was across the room. He realized that the fear wasn't new. It was conditioned, repeated, seeded into her over time. Emily hadn't just been cruel, she'd been calculated. She'd learned exactly how to make Margaret too scared to ask for help, too scared to reach out to her own son. When Richard faced Emily again, there was no emotion left in his stare, no warmth, no confusion, no hesitation, only a clarity sharpened by betrayal. You don't get to speak to her again, he said. You don't get to explain yourself. You don't get to rewrite any part of this. He crossed his arms. I know exactly what's been happening while I've been away, and trust me, this is just the beginning of what's coming next. Emily's eyes widened. She realized too late that she had pushed too far, that the version of Richard she could manipulate had been replaced by someone she could no longer control. Fear flickered across her features, but her pride fought back, lifting her chin in defiance. Don't threaten me, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. It's not a threat, Richard replied, it's a promise. Richard stood in the living room, chest rising and falling with a measured control that didn't match the storm inside him. Emily hovered near the doorway, trying to regain composure, but her eyes shifted nervously from his hands to his face as if she could sense he was about to unravel every deception she had built. His mother was finally resting on the sofa, still shaken but safe for the moment. Now it was Emily's turn. Give me your phone, Richard said, his voice calm in a way that made Emily tense. The emotional manipulation she usually relied on would not work today. Not with the weight of what she had done pressed into the air between them. Emily stiffened. Why? She asked, trying to force a laugh but failing. Richard, don't be ridiculous. My phone has nothing to do with this. He extended his hand. Your phone now. She stood frozen for several seconds, her chest tightening as though the room had shrunk. When she finally reached into her pocket and handed over the device, she did it with the resignation of someone realizing they were standing at the edge of a cliff with nowhere left to run. Richard took it without a word. He unlocked it easily. He had set the passcode himself a year earlier, back when trust still seemed like an unbreakable foundation between them. As the screen lit up, Emily's face changed not into guilt, but into dread. The kind that reveals exactly how much someone has to hide. Richard opened her messaging apps first. His instincts, sharpened by years of reading people in business negotiations, guided him to the archived conversations, one app, then another. Then he found an archived thread labeled not with a name, but with the word investor. A label Emily probably thought looked professional enough to avoid suspicion. He tapped it, and the world he knew collapsed into ash. There were messages spanning months-long threads, deleted pictures, plans made, plans fulfilled, complaints about him, complaints about Margaret. None of it subtle, none of it remorseful. The first message he opened read, "She finally gave up the necklace. Can you believe the old bat held onto it this long? I'll sell it tomorrow. Spa day after God knows I earned it living with these people." Richard's hands tightened around the phone. The thought of his mother's cherished necklace, something she wore only on anniversaries, something his father had given her decades earlier, being tossed away for vanity and pleasure, made his stomach turn. But the next messages were worse. "He'll be gone in 3 days, plenty of time to meet. The idiot thinks I'm at home cooking. When he's traveling, this house feels like mine." Richard read each line with increasing horror, his throat tightening. The woman he had trusted, loved, and believed to be loyal had been living a double life without a flicker of hesitation. Emily had maneuvered through their marriage like it was a stage set, playing the part that suited her while exploiting his absence to pursue someone else, using his resources, his home, and even his mother's sentimental treasure as funding for her secret life. Emily stepped forward, voice trembling. "Richard, whatever you re-seeing, it's not what you think. Those are old messages. I was going through a rough time. I didn't mean any of it. I was just venting." "Venting," Richard said, lifting his eyes from the screen. "You call this venting?" He tapped the phone again and turned the screen toward her. A photo filled the display. Emily in lingerie he had never seen before, taken in their bedroom. Posing in front of their mirror, her wedding ring visible on her hand as she texted someone else. Emily flushed red, anger and embarrassment rising in equal measure. "You weren't here," she snapped. "You were gone all the time. What did you expect me to do? Sit around and knit while you traveled the world ignoring me?" "You don't cheat because you were lonely," Richard said, his voice turning hard as stone. "You cheat because you have no integrity." She scoffed. "Please, do you think any woman my age wants to be married to a man who's never home? I needed attention. I needed affection. You weren't giving me either." "Affection," Richard repeated, stunned by the audacity of her justification. "You tormented my mother to entertain yourself. And you re-blaming me because you weren't getting enough attention." Emily's face twisted. She got in the way. "Richard, everything was about her. Every decision, every plan, every moment we had together, she ruined it. I was supposed to be your wife. Not some background character living in the shadow of an old woman who should have been in assisted living years ago." That was the line that destroyed whatever tiny fraction of restraint Richard still held. "My mother is the reason I became the man you married," he said through clenched teeth. "She sacrificed everything so I could succeed. And you treat her like she's disposable." Emily crossed her arms tightly, her chin lifting in defiance. "I treated her the way she treated me. She never liked me. She was always judging, always watching, always complaining when you weren't around. She tried to make me look bad in front of you." "No," Richard said, stepping closer. "She tried to warn me. And I was too blinded by what I thought you were to see who you really are." He scrolled further, more messages, plans for hotel rooms, conversations dripping with contempt. Financial transactions that hinted Emily had been siphoning money into private accounts. Pictures of jewelry he had gifted her, some now sold, some traded for things she wanted more. Everything revealed a person who never loved him, only what he could provide. Emily realized he saw it all now. And instead of remorse, she shifted into the one emotion she always defaulted to when exposed: anger. "You know what?" she spat. "You brought this on yourself. You left me alone. You ignored me. You let that woman become the center of our marriage. I had needs, Richard, and someone else actually cared enough to fill them. Maybe if you were a better husband, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere." Richard stared at her as though seeing a stranger. "You abused an elderly woman," he said slowly. "You stole from her. You lied to me. You cheated on me. And you still think you were the victim." Emily's eyes flashed. "I deserved more than this life, more than this house, more than the scraps you threw at me between your business trips." Richard pointed to the phone. "You deserved exactly what you were about to get." In that instant, Emily understood the magnitude of her mistake, not because she felt guilt, but because she realized the power she had believed was permanent had evaporated. The man she thought she controlled was gone. The man standing before her was someone she couldn't manipulate, charm, or intimidate. And for the first time, she felt something she had never expected: fear. Emily stood rooted to the floor, her breath uneven as she watched Richard scroll through more of her messages. She could see the shift happening inside him. The quiet but definitive transformation of a man who had loved her into a man who now saw her as a threat and an enemy. She sensed that whatever version of him she had manipulated for years was gone, replaced by someone she could no longer bend. That realization forced her into a new tactic: survival, and survival for someone like Emily meant going on offense. Her voice rose with a sudden edge. "You think you can just throw me out?" she snapped, lifting her chin in defiance. "We remarried, Richard. California is a community property state. Half of everything here is legally mine. This house, your accounts, the company profits you earned during our marriage, I get my share. So don't think for a minute you can just push me out because you re-angry." Richard watched her, expression unreadable. He let her speak, even allowed her to believe for a moment that her legal knowledge, half understood, half invented, gave her leverage. Emily mistook that stillness for hesitation and misinterpreted the lack of argument as a sign that she had cornered him. She stepped closer, confidence returning with each step. "I know you, Richard. You hate conflict. You don't want your name in the news. You don't want investors backing away because your wife says you abused her emotionally. You know I could do it. I could ruin you with a single interview." Richard finally lifted his eyes from the phone. The composure on his face wasn't fear, it was the calm of someone who had already won. Someone who had read the end of the story long before the antagonist realized the book was closing. "Is that what you were planning?" he asked. "To threaten me into giving you money?" Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "I'm not walking away from this marriage with nothing. I gave up years for you. I put my life on hold for you. So yes, I expect to be compensated for the time I wasted." Richard stared at her with a look that made her falter. A look that said he knew more than she imagined. He set the phone down on the marble counter, folded his arms, and leveled his gaze at her. "Emily," he said slowly, "before you go any further, I want you to think very carefully about the next words that come out of your mouth. Because the moment you threaten me again, the moment you imply you deserve anything from me, you will be forcing me to remind you of something you conveniently forgot." Emily's eyebrows knit together. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he walked to the office desk near the window, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder, thin, precise, and unmistakably familiar. When Emily saw the corner of the document poking out, her posture wavered. A flicker of recognition crossed her eyes, a faint memory. A signature she'd scribbled years ago without reading the details. A signature she now desperately wished she had paid attention to. Richard set the folder on the table and slid it toward her. "Read it," he said. Emily didn't move. "That's not fair. I didn't know what I was signing." "You didn't care what you were signing," Richard corrected. "You were too busy picking out diamond hairpieces with your bridesmaids to read anything that didn't sparkle." Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't pick up the document. Richard opened it himself, turning to the page he knew would end any illusion she still clung to. He tapped the clause with a steady finger. "You remember this part, the separation of assets, the infidelity clause." Emily's throat tightened. "We were getting married," she said, voice desperate now. "What kind of man makes his finky sign something like that?" "A man who built everything from nothing," Richard answered. "And who wanted to believe his future wife loved him for who he was, not for what he owned. This document was meant to protect me from exactly the kind of person you've just proven yourself to be." Emily's voice became sharp again, a weapon she wielded whenever fear crept too close. "I can fight that. I'll say you pressured me. I'll say you manipulated me into signing it. You re a powerful man, everyone will believe you coerced me." Richard didn't flinch. "You can try, but it won't work." He leaned slightly toward her. "Because the prenup was recorded on video. Your mother was in the room. Your attorney was present. You were sober, laughing, and bragging about how you didn't need to read anything because you trusted me completely." The blood drained from Emily's face. Richard continued, his voice gaining a razor-sharp precision that left her with nowhere to hide. "And even if you could fight it, which you can't, the infidelity clause overrides everything. The moment you cheated, the contract became ironclad. Legally binding, unbreakable." Emily shook her head quickly, as if denial could somehow reverse the chain of events. "You can't do this, Richard. You can't. I've been your wife. You've been a liar," he corrected, "a manipulator, and now you an adulterer." Emily's voice cracked. "I loved you. No, Richard said, the words striking like a blow. You loved the lifestyle. You loved the houses, the travel, the attention. You loved everything except me. For a moment, Emily's expression cracked open in a mixture of panic, rage, and the dawning realization that she had played the game too boldly and lost. She looked around the house as though seeing it for the last time. The art she picked out, the furniture she posed in for pictures, the luxury she flaunted to friends, all slipping away. Then desperation twisted into venom. You think you can just throw me out of this marriage like trash? You think I'm just going to disappear because some stupid contract says so? Her voice rose as she stepped toward him. I will drag your name through every courtroom in California. I will tell the press you hit me. I will make sure your company collapses under the weight of the scandal. Richard let her finish, then he spoke, his voice calm, unwavering, lethal in its certainty. Emily, you already lost. You just haven't accepted it yet. Her rage faltered. Richard continued, the prenup leaves you with exactly what you brought into this marriage, nothing. And the evidence on your phone, the photos, the messages, the financial transactions connected to your lover ensures you won't see a single cent from me in a courtroom. You walked into this marriage with debt. You'll walk out with more. Emily's breath hitched. Her last weapon money had just evaporated. And one more thing, Richard added. If you attempt to smear my name, if you try to drag my mother into your lies or fabricate abuse, I will countersue with every resource I have. And trust me, Emily, I have far more than you can imagine. Emily's knees wavered as the truth finally settled into place as the game was over. The power she once clung to had been an illusion. The man she underestimated had transformed into the force that would dismantle everything she built on deceit. And for the first time since meeting Richard Lawson, she was the one with nothing. Emily stared at Richard as if she had just been handed a prison sentence, her chest rising sharply with each panicked breath. The prenup, the infidelity clause, the evidence, the reality that she was leaving this marriage with nothing slammed into her all at once. For a moment, she looked stunned, trapped between fury and desperation, unable to decide which to unleash first. Richard wasn't watching her reaction for entertainment or revenge. He simply observed her with the kind of cold detachment reserved for business opponents who had overplayed their hand. She no longer existed in his life as a partner. She was a problem to be removed, and he was finally ready to remove her. You have 10 minutes, he said, his voice steady, his posture unshakable. Go upstairs. Pack whatever belongs to you, and I mean only what belongs to you. Nothing I bought you, nothing you took from my mother, nothing you didn't bring into this house. 10 minutes. Then you leave. Emily blinked, stunned. You were joking. No, he said, I'm not. Her face twisted. You don't get to throw me out like some stray animal. Richard didn't flinch. You made that choice when you betrayed this family. He pointed to the staircase. 9 minutes now. Emily's breath caught. The countdown terrified her more than anything he had said before. She had relied on Richard's patience, his kindness, his emotional restraint, traits she once mistook for weakness. But now those same traits made him even more formidable. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't cursing, he wasn't threatening. He was executing a decision, and a man like Richard Lawson, once certain of something, was immovable. Her expression shifted again, desperation seeping into every line of her posture. Richard, please, she said, voice softening unnaturally. Don't do this, we can work through this. Couples have problems all the time. I will change, I swear I will change. In 8 minutes, Richard replied calmly, you'll be out the door. Emily's desperation spiked. She switched tactics instantly, as if flipping through a mental playbook of manipulative strategies. I'll tell everyone you threw your wife out for no reason, she hissed. I'll say you hurt me. I'll say you threatened me. Who do you think the world will believe? A powerful businessman, or a young woman crying on camera? Richard locked eyes with her. Try it. Something in his tone, absolute certainty, absolute fearlessness, made her swallow hard. For the first time, she realized she was no longer in control of anything. And even worse, she realized that threatening him would only make her situation worse. You wouldn't dare call the police, she snapped. I will, he said, and I'll show them everything. He didn't need to explain what everything meant. Emily knew. The messages, the photos, the recorded threats she had just made, and most importantly the months of mistreatment inflicted on Margaret. She could see the entire legal battle laid out before her, and she would lose every piece of it. Her gaze darted to Margaret, who sat on the sofa watching with wide, teary eyes. For a split second, Emily's expression hardened, revealing her true nature once again. If looks could wound, Margaret would have collapsed under the weight of that glare. But then she quickly rearranged her face into something pitiful, frightened, fragile, innocent. Please, Emily whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. Where am I supposed to go? Richard remained unmoved. Where you go isn't my concern anymore. Emily's desperation morphed into hostility once more. This is my home too. She screamed. He corrected, past tense. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a brief moment, she seemed to deflate, as though realizing every weapon in her arsenal had lost its edge. Then, with a sharp turn, she stormed toward the stairs, heels pounding against the steps with each furious stump. Richard stood still, listening to the chaos erupting upstairs, drawers slamming, hangers scraping, suitcases dragged across hardwood floors. Emily's frantic movements were the final unraveling of a life built on manipulation. Margaret watched her son, studying the tension in his jaw and the pain lingering beneath his controlled exterior. Richard, she whispered, her voice trembling, I never wanted to cause trouble between you two. I thought maybe she was just stressed. Richard turned to her, his expression softening instantly. He knelt in front of her, taking her fragile hands gently. Mom, you didn't cause anything. None of this is your fault. The only person responsible is the one packing upstairs. Margaret shook her head slowly. I should have told you sooner. Richard's voice deepened with emotion. I should have seen it sooner. Upstairs, something crashed against a wall, Emily throwing something in anger, probably something she couldn't pack or claim. Richard's body tensed, but he didn't move. Emily could throw tantrums, break things, scream until her voice cracked. It wouldn't change the outcome. Several minutes passed. Emily's footsteps thundered down the stairs again. She appeared at the bottom with a single overstuffed duffel bag and a coat thrown over her arm. Her hair was disheveled, makeup smeared, but her eyes burned with indignation. She stopped a few feet from Richard, breathing hard. This isn't over, she spat bitterly. You'll all regret this. One day you'll end up alone in this giant house with no one but her. She flicked her gaze toward Margaret, injecting as much venom into the look as she could muster. And when that day comes, I hope you remember that you pushed away the only woman who ever truly cared about you. Richard stepped toward the front door and pulled it open, the cool Malibu air rushing into the foyer. The woman who cared about me wouldn't have done what you did. Leave. Emily glared at him one final time, fury burning through her. But underneath it all was unmistakable fear, the fear of a woman who had bet everything on deception and lost. She marched outside, the sound of her heels hitting the driveway sharp and erratic. Richard didn't wait for her to turn around. He shut the door firmly behind her. For the first time in months, maybe years, Margaret exhaled without tension gripping her chest. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile triumphantly. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of relief so profound it nearly buckled her. Richard returned to her side, placing a comforting hand over hers. She squeezed his fingers weakly. It's over, he said softly. She can't hurt you anymore. Margaret nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. I feel like I can breathe again. Richard looked toward the door, then back at his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him, who had been mistreated in the very home he built to honor her. A wave of guilt, love, and determination washed through him. She's gone, he said, for good. And for the first time in a long time, that house, once poisoned by resentment and cruelty, felt like it belongs to them again. The morning after Emily's departure, the house felt strangely lighter. It wasn't joyous, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, too raw, but the oppressive weight that had lingered for months seemed to dissipate like fog burning off under the California sun. For the first time in a long time, Richard woke up without bracing himself for tension, without wondering what subtle conflict might erupt the moment he stepped into the hallway. Now he had a mission, one that had nothing to do with business or contracts or investors. It involved something far more personal, restoring something precious that had been stolen from the woman who deserved the world. Margaret sat in the kitchen, shoulders wrapped in a soft shawl, her hands curled loosely around a warm cup of tea. She looked fragile but calmer than the day before. Even so, Richard noticed how often she glanced toward the doorway, as if half expecting Emily to stride in, voice sharp and impatient. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and kissed the top of her head. I have to run an errand, he told her. But I'll be back soon. She looked up at him with tired eyes. Is everything all right? It will be, he said, I promise. Richard grabbed his keys and headed out, driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, not toward his office, but toward a part of Los Angeles he seldom visited anymore. The neighborhoods changed rapidly as he moved inland, glittering ocean views giving way to urban grit. Palm-lined boulevards turning into narrow streets cluttered with traffic lights and small storefronts. He finally pulled up outside a pawn shop squeezed between a liquor store and a check-cashing business. A fading sign above the door read Golden Brick Pawn, accompanied by a flickering neon dollar sign. He stepped out of his car and walked inside, greeted by the faint scent of dust and old metal. Behind a glass counter stood a man in his 50s with a shaved head and thick glasses, flipping through a ledger. The man looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed Richard's tailored coat, polished shoes, and air of authority. This wasn't the usual customer. "Help you with something?" the man asked, leaning on the counter. Richard pulled a crumpled pawn ticket from his coat pocket, something he found the night before while cleaning out Emily's drawer. He set it down on the glass. "I'm here for this." The man picked up the slip, studied it for a moment, and then raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I remember this one. Woman came in with a pearl necklace. Said she needed cash fast." He snorted. "She drove off in a luxury SUV, though. Funny what people will pawn for pocket money." Richard bit down a surge of anger. He didn't want to think about Emily's entitlement, the ease with which she dismantled family history for her own convenience. "Do you still have it?" The man nodded. "Yeah, haven't had time to appraise it yet. Necklace like that, I was sure she'd come back. Guess not." "She won't," Richard said flatly. "Suit yourself." The man shrugged and disappeared into the back room. A moment later, he returned carrying a velvet box that had once been elegant but now showed signs of wear. He set it on the counter and opened it. Even under the pawn shop's dull fluorescent lighting, the pearls glowed softly, each one perfectly round and cream-colored. The clasp, an antique gold piece engraved with delicate filigree, sparked faintly when the light hit it. Richard felt something twist inside his chest. This necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was a memory of his father, a symbol of decades of love, a piece of Margaret's identity. Emily saw it as currency, but to his mother it was an heirloom representing everything she had treasured in her life. "What's the final price?" Richard asked, his tone steady. The man handed him a slip of paper with an amount significantly above what Emily had received. Pawn shops thrived on desperation, and Richard understood the game well enough not to argue. Money could be earned again. This necklace couldn't be replaced. He pulled out his card. "I'll take it." The owner processed the transaction quickly, occasionally glancing at him, perhaps curious about the story behind such a sentimental item. But Richard didn't offer one, and the man didn't ask. When the transaction was complete, the owner closed the velvet box and pushed it gently across the counter. "Whatever this piece means to you," he said, "take good care of it." Richard nodded, picking up the box with a respect usually reserved for something far more fragile. "I will." The drive home felt different from the drive there. The box sat in the passenger seat, and Richard found himself glancing at it several times, imagining how his mother's face would light up when she saw it again. He imagined her fingers smoothing over the pearls, remembering the night his father had given it to her, a memory stolen by cruelty about to be restored. When he walked into the house, Margaret was still in the kitchen, now nibbling on a piece of toast, though she barely ate more than a bite or two. She looked up as he approached, curiosity filling her features. Richard pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. He placed the velvet box on the table between them. Margaret blinked in confusion. "What's that?" "Something that belongs to you," he said softly. She reached for the box with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. The moment her eyes landed on the necklace, her breath caught. A gasp escaped her, followed by a hand flying to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Oh, Richard." She touched the pearls delicately, as though afraid they might disappear if pressed too hard. "I thought she told me she lost it." Then she said it broke. I didn't want to believe. Her voice cracked. "Your father gave me this for our 25th anniversary. I thought it was gone forever." "It's not gone," Richard said, placing a hand over hers, "and nothing she did can take this away from you again." Margaret looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude, but also heartbreak, grief for the trust she had misplaced, pain for the cruelty she had endured. But when Richard took the necklace from the box and fastened it gently around her neck, something transformed. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted, her expression softened into something peaceful. It was as if he had returned a missing part of her. "I feel like myself again," she whispered, fingers resting lightly on the pearls. Richard touched her shoulder. "You should never have felt like anything less." And for the first time since the nightmare began, Margaret smiled, not out of politeness or fear, but out of genuine relief. She wasn't just being protected, she was being restored. In the days following Emily's departure, the Lawson home settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, yet far from it. Margaret still carried months of emotional damage in her posture, in the way her hands occasionally trembled when someone walked too quickly past her, and in the habit she had developed of asking permission before doing anything, even something as small as pouring herself water. But the house was finally safe again, and Richard was determined to make sure she never felt anything less than cherished inside it. Every morning he joined her for breakfast, something he hadn't done regularly in years. He'd sit across from her with a cup of coffee while she picked at fruit or toast, gently encouraging her to eat a little more each day. Some mornings she chatted softly about old memories, stories of his childhood he barely remembered. Other mornings she simply enjoyed the peace, no longer flinching at the expectation of being scolded for taking up too much space. One afternoon, Richard walked into the living room and found Margaret folding napkins in small, tidy squares. The housekeeper stood nearby, trying politely to convince her she didn't need to help anymore, that everything was under control. But Margaret refused to sit down. "I need to do something," she insisted gently. "My hands feel idle." Richard watched from the doorway, recognizing the deeper truth behind her words. Emily had conditioned her to believe stillness equated to worthlessness. She wasn't folding napkins for the sake of cleanliness. She was trying to prove she wasn't a burden. The sight made his chest tighten. Later that night, as he sat in his home office reviewing a stack of proposals for a new development project, an idea slowly formed, an idea that could give Margaret back something Emily had stolen: purpose. Her mind was sharp, her instincts shaped by a lifetime of making ends meet on little. She had grown up budgeting every dollar, solving problems creatively, running a household under pressure most architects never imagined. Richard realized that his company, Lawson Development, needed someone like her, someone grounded in the realities of everyday living. Someone who could see past glossy renderings and question whether a kitchen layout made sense for an actual family, or whether a window was positioned in a way that made a home feel open rather than oppressive. The next morning, Richard asked her to dress nicely and join him in the car. Margaret looked puzzled, even flustered, as she smoothed the front of her blouse. "Where are we going?" she asked, worry creeping into her tone. Old habits, fear of Emily's harsh criticism, still clung to her like a shadow. Richard smiled softly. "Not to a doctor," he said, anticipating her first assumption. "Come with me, you will see." He drove her to the main office building of Lawson Development, a sleek glass structure that contrasted sharply with her modest demeanor. Employees straightened in surprise as they watched their CEO escort an elderly woman through the lobby. Some recognized her from photos in Richard's office, and others simply sensed from his posture that she was someone important. He led her into the large conference room, where a team of architects and project managers were reviewing blueprints for an affordable housing complex slated for East Los Angeles. When Richard entered, conversation stopped instantly. He gestured toward the table. "I want you all to meet someone," he said. "This is Margaret Lawson, my mother, and from today on she'll be consulting with us." The team looked at each other, uncertain whether this was symbolic or serious. Margaret blinked nervously, touching the strand of pearls around her neck. She looked like she might try to decline the invitation, but Richard gave her a reassuring nod and placed a hand on her shoulder. He pulled out a chair for her. "Mom," he said gently, "I want you to look at these plans. Tell us what you think. Don't hold back." At first she hesitated, unsure of her place. But as she studied the blueprint spread across the table, a two-bedroom layout meant for small families, her expression changed. Her brow furrowed slightly, her fingers tracing the lines of the drawing. She pointed to the position of the kitchen. "This isn't right," she murmured. "If the laundry room is all the way back here, a mother won't be able to keep an eye on dinner while switching loads. And these windows, they were too small. Families who can't afford air conditioning need cross breeze." The room fell completely still, not because she was wrong, but because she was right, exactly right. And no one in the room had thought about it. Richard smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He turned to his team. "You heard her. Adjust the plans." Margaret looked startled. "Oh, I didn't mean you had to change anything. I was just—" "You were correct," Richard said, "and we hired you so we could get things right." Something lit inside her, not suddenly but gradually, like embers catching a steady flame. Her shoulders straightened, her eyes brightened, and for the first time since Emily had entered her life, Margaret Lawson felt not like a burden, but like a woman whose voice carried weight. Over the next few weeks, she returned to the office frequently. Employees began to greet her warmly, sometimes even affectionately calling her Mrs. L or the boss's boss. She reviewed layouts, offered suggestions, and reminded highly trained professionals about realities they often overlooked. She pointed out doorways too narrow for walkers, counters too high for aging seniors, windows that let in too much heat for low-income families struggling to pay utility bills. Her observations were sharp, rooted in lived experience, and employees began to take notes whenever she spoke. Richard loved watching it. He loved seeing her confidence return, seeing her laugh with interns half her age, seeing her forget, if only for a few hours at a time, the months she spent shrinking under Emily's cruelty. Every time Margaret entered the room, people listened. Every time she spoke, someone learned something. Emily had tried to diminish her to make her feel useless, but here Margaret was indispensable. One afternoon as they walked out of the office together, Margaret touched his arm. "Richard," she said softly, "thank you. I haven't felt important in a long time." He shook his head gently. "Mom, you've always been important. You just needed the world to see what I've known my whole life." She smiled, warm and genuine. "I almost forgot who I was, but being here helping you, it makes me feel alive again." The sun glowed warmly over the city as they walked to the car. For the first time in years, Margaret carried herself like the woman she once was, a woman who overcame hardship, raised a child alone, and never let the world break her. Emily had tried to erase that strength, but Richard had restored it. Driving home, he glanced at his mother and felt something settle within him, a profound peace he hadn't known he was missing. Helping her regain her dignity wasn't just healing her, it was healing him too. And as Margaret gazed out the window at the passing streets, the pearls at her throat catching the afternoon light, Richard realized that their story was no longer about loss. It was about rebuilding. It was about remembering. It was about reclaiming everything Emily had tried to steal. In giving his mother her purpose back, he had given both of them a new beginning. The following year unfolded with a gentleness neither Richard nor Margaret had expected. After everything they had endured, peace felt almost foreign at first, like a quiet guest knocking softly on their door, unsure whether it was welcome. But day by day they embraced it. Richard worked fewer nights, choosing to bring files home instead of staying at the office until midnight. He cooked dinner with his mother, even when she teased him for still chopping vegetables like he was afraid of the knife. They watched old movies together, reminisced about his father, and filled the house with a warmth that had been missing for far too long. Margaret continued visiting Lawson Development, becoming something of a legend there. Her insights saved the company millions and, more importantly, improved the quality of life for families who would someday live in the homes Richard built. She had a way of seeing details others overlooked and connecting emotionally with the people whose lives would be changed by the company's work. Employees adored her, and the weekly Margaret Review, a meeting where she gave feedback on new designs, became a beloved part of office culture. But time, as always, moved forward, and though her spirit was stronger than ever, Margaret's health began to waver. It started gradually: fatigue in the afternoons, shortness of breath after walking up the stairs, hands that trembled not from fear but from age. Richard noticed every change with a son's instinctive worry. He brought in the best doctors, arranged checkups, adjusted her diet, made sure she never lifted anything heavier than a mug. But even the finest care could not stop the natural decline of an aging body. Margaret, ever graceful, accepted it with quiet dignity. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the Malibu sky with streaks of amber and rose, Margaret sat with Richard on the terrace wrapped in a soft blanket. She wore the pearl necklace, she wore it often now, each time with the same reverence as the first day he returned it to her. She reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "You've given me the best years of my life," she said, her voice soft but steady. Richard's throat tightened. "Mom, don't say it like that. We still have time." She smiled at him lovingly, the kind of smile only a mother can give. "We have the time we meant to have. And I'm grateful for all of it. You saved me, Richard. When I felt small, you helped me remember who I was." "You were never small," he whispered. "Maybe not," she said, "but I needed you to remind me." In the following months, her health continued to decline. But Margaret faced it with the same resilience that had carried her through every hardship in her life. Richard stayed close, refusing to travel for work, spending every precious moment by her side. He read to her from her favorite books, played her old records, and made sure she never felt alone, not even for a second. One crisp morning, Richard found her sitting in her favorite armchair near the window, dressed neatly with her hair combed back, as if she had been preparing herself for something meaningful. The pearl necklace shimmered softly against her blouse. She looked peaceful, almost luminous. Richard approached her with a tender smile, but when he touched her shoulder, he knew immediately. Her hand rested lightly in her lap, fingers curled with softness, and her face carried an expression of serenity that told him she had left the world without fear. His breath caught, his heart cracked, but beneath the sorrow was gratitude, deep, overwhelming gratitude that her final moments had been filled with love, dignity, and peace. He sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering, "I love you," even though she was already beyond hearing. And in that quiet moment, with the morning light bathing the room, he felt a profound certainty that she knew. The funeral was small, just as she had always wanted. Close friends, former neighbors, a handful of Lawson Development employees who had come to love her as much as he did. Richard spoke briefly, not with the practiced eloquence of a businessman, but with the raw honesty of a son who had lost his anchor. The pearl necklace rested around her neck in the casket, her final wish. But grief, as heavy as it was, did not crush him. Instead, it shaped him. Margaret's strength, her kindness, her resilience, he wanted those qualities to live on in something bigger than both of them. Something that could help people like her elders who were overlooked, mistreated, or abandoned. People who deserved dignity, respect, and care. So 3 months after her passing, Richard founded the Margaret Lawson Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing housing resources and emotional support for elderly individuals facing neglect or loneliness. He funded the foundation personally, pouring into it the kind of devotion others reserved for religion or family. No senior should feel forgotten. The mission statement read, "Every life has value, every story deserves honor." The foundation launched programs across Los Angeles: free home safety renovations, companionship services, affordable senior housing units designed using Margaret's own recommendations. Volunteers read books to retirees, helped them navigate medical systems, and visited those living alone in small apartments. Margaret's influence touched every part of it, from architectural choices to counseling services to the requirement that each facility have a community garden. Because she always believed people heal faster when they're surrounded by life. As the foundation grew, so did Richard's sense of purpose. For the first time in years, his wealth felt meaningful. His company thrived, but not because of financial success, because employees felt inspired, connected to something real. They knew they were building more than homes, they were building legacies. And Emily, she called once, months later, from an unknown number. Richard didn't answer. She left a voicemail full of excuses, desperation, pleas for help. He forwarded it to his attorney without listening to the end. She had made her choices, and he was done offering her pieces of the life she tried to destroy. But he didn't hate her. He didn't feel anger anymore. She was simply a closed chapter. Years later, as Richard walked through the courtyard of a newly completed senior housing complex, the largest project the foundation had ever built, he paused beside a bronze plaque bearing his mother's name. Children played nearby as grandparents watched from shaded benches. Volunteers tended to the garden while residents sat laughing together under umbrellas. The sight filled him with a profound sense of fulfillment. This was her legacy. This was their healing. He placed a hand gently on the plaque. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "Your story didn't end, it just changed shape." And as he walked forward into the sunlight, the world around him felt full, not of sadness, but of purpose, of resilience, and of the love that had defined Margaret Lawson's entire life. The story of Richard and Margaret teaches us that love, no matter how strong or deeply rooted, can sometimes blind us to the truth right in front of us. Richard believed he had built a stable, fulfilling life with a woman who genuinely loved him. He believed his mother was safe under his roof, cared for, respected, and treated as family. But trust can be a dangerous thing when given to the wrong person. Emily wore her charm like armor, using kindness as a disguise to manipulate, deceive, and gradually take control of a household that had welcomed her openly. The lesson here is that trust should never be blind, especially when the well-being of someone vulnerable is tied to it. Love should not keep us from seeing red flags, and loyalty should never require sacrificing our principles or our judgment. Another crucial message woven into this story is the importance of paying attention to the quiet suffering of those we care about. Margaret endured emotional abuse, manipulation, and degradation for months, too afraid to speak up and too loyal to risk burdening her son. Many elderly individuals fall into similar patterns not because they lack strength, but because they were raised in generations that valued endurance and discretion over confrontation. The lesson is that silence chosen or imposed can hide profound pain. It reminds us to check on those who may not ask for help, to look deeper when something feels off, and to understand that vulnerability often hides behind a polite smile or habitual obedience. Protecting loved ones sometimes means asking uncomfortable questions and recognizing signs of distress that they may be too ashamed or frightened to reveal. The story also reveals a profound truth about character. Adversity doesn't create character as much as it reveals it. Emily's cruelty didn't appear overnight. It had been inside her all along, waiting for the opportunity to surface. When faced with responsibility, she chose resentment. When given authority, she chose control. When offered love, she took advantage. In contrast, Margaret's suffering revealed her resilience, her dignity, and her enduring compassion even as she was pushed beyond her limits. Richard, confronted with betrayal, responded not by lashing out but by acting decisively, honorably, and protectively. Character is exposed in moments when the masks fall, when comfort disappears, and when morality is tested. This story urges us to look beyond outward performances and judge people by their consistent actions, not their crafted personas. Equally powerful is the story's message about redemption, not for the person who caused harm, but for the one who endured it. Margaret's journey back to herself is a reminder that healing is possible at any age. The necklace Richard retrieved was more than a piece of jewelry. It symbolized everything that had been taken from her: her pride, her memories, her importance, her identity. By returning it, Richard didn't just undo a theft, he restored her sense of worth. And by bringing her into his company, he helped her rediscover her voice and value in a world that often overlooks older generations. The lesson is that dignity can be restored through love, patience, and intentional effort. No one is too old, too wounded, or too diminished to reclaim their identity when surrounded by genuine care. Richard's arc teaches us just as much. He learned that protecting someone doesn't end at providing them shelter. It means being willing to fight for them when they cannot fight for themselves. It means taking responsibility for the blind spots in our lives and correcting the consequences when they hurt others. His grief over not realizing the truth sooner became a driving force for change, expressed not through anger but through meaningful action. By founding the Margaret Lawson Foundation, he created something that extends far beyond personal redemption. He turned guilt into compassion, pain into purpose, and loss into a legacy that helps countless others. The lesson is clear: the most powerful form of healing is using our suffering to prevent someone else's. And finally, the story illustrates that not every chapter deserves continuation. For all her manipulation and cruelty, Emily's greatest punishment wasn't legal or financial, it was irrelevance. Richard didn't spend years seeking revenge. He simply removed her from his life, refused to give her control, and rebuilt a world where she no longer had power. Walking away from toxicity, refusing to let the past manipulate the future, is often the strongest and most liberating choice we can make. Emily lost because she underestimated the power of integrity and overestimated the strength of her deceit. Her downfall is a lesson in consequence. No matter how carefully lies are spun, truth has a way of unraveling them in the end. Together, these lessons form a tapestry of themes woven through the story: love, loyalty, vulnerability, resilience, justice, and legacy. They remind us that family is not defined by marriage certificates or shared homes, but by compassion and sacrifice. They show us that the true measure of a person is revealed in the moments when they believe no one is watching. They teach us that healing is possible even after deep betrayal, and that we have the power to rewrite the ending of any story if we choose courage over fear. Most importantly, they remind us that the love between a parent and child, imperfect, enduring, and unconditional, can survive even the darkest storms and emerge stronger on the other side.
If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.